So we're going to dive in today. Our topic today is mindfully social. So talking about interpersonal skills, assertiveness, some boundaries, and just how having some mindfulness around these topics can really help us enhance our relationships and just be better, better equipped to deal with our relationships and be in partnership with others. So interpersonal skills are a composite of social skills, assertiveness, and listening skills. Relationships are really precious to us, and they're really valuable and really important to us as human beings. We really value connection, and we need that connection. But they're also a place of a lot of vulnerability for us as well. They can bring love, companionship, and support into our lives, but sometimes, in maybe even the snap of a finger, they can become broken beyond repair, and it can leave us feeling really sad, really desperate in some cases, and just really overwhelmed. So keeping your relationships healthy and alive requires certain interpersonal skills, which I hope that we can kind of learn a little bit more about in this group today. And the most necessary and important of these skills is assertiveness. So assertiveness is the ability to ask for what you want, to say no, and to negotiate conflict without damaging the relationship, which I think is one of the trickiest parts, right? Because as we've learned in previous weeks, when we are really emotionally overwhelmed, that rational part of our brain shuts off, and it makes it really hard for us to negotiate conflict when we're in a place of just complete threat and fight, flight, or freeze. So before we learn assertiveness, though, there's a couple other things that we need to touch on before. So mindfulness, as we've learned, is a really simple but powerful practice. It has the possibility of transforming relationships. It cultivates the same kind of attitudes and foundations towards oneself and others. It gives rise to non-judgmental awareness of arising experiences, as we touched on today, acceptance, presence, openness, spaciousness. It allows us to let go. It cultivates empathy. It can bring a sense of calmness. And it's also a practice of awakening the heart, I guess, to loving kindness and compassion for others. So there's also a self-compassion piece there as well, or just compassion in general. So relationships really require our attention, whether it's with an intimate partner, a friend, a coworker, or maybe just somebody, an acquaintance, a carpool companion maybe. Maintaining a good relationship depends on noticing the other person's feelings and reactions, and then watching the process between the two of you, right? And how their feelings and reactions may influence your feelings and reactions, and how those two, like each other's feelings and reactions, are interacting with each other, that dynamic there. So when we're paying attention, this means staying in the here and now, not thinking about what you want to say next, focusing on another memory. It means remaining present to what you see, hear, and sense emotionally in the present. In the same way that you can breathe, walk, or do dishes mindfully, you can also relate with full awareness to the present moment as well. So you can have that mindful attention to the present as well. And that's the kind of the skill that we've been looking at cultivating throughout this whole, the past 7 weeks. So when you're able to pay attention and have that full awareness to the present moment, you're going to be able to notice when trouble's coming. So, and this can help us when we're trying to minimize those overwhelming feelings, because we can pick up on it before it becomes that tidal wave, or before it becomes so overwhelming that we can't cope with it anymore. You also really gain time when you're asking clarifying questions to your partner in the moment, in the conflict, in that situation, when you're able to pay attention, and this can help correct any misconceptions or miscommunications in the situation as well. So by being able to pay attention and be in that full present moment, you're able, that attention that you're developing through mindfulness practices will serve you well in moments of conflict or moments of argument, because you can manage your own emotions in that. Notice when things are coming up, and maybe that you're feeling a little bit triggered or overwhelmed, and you're starting to feel that coming on, that tidal wave, and to ask questions about that and be curious about what's going on for you, but also what perhaps is going on for your partner or the person you're interacting with that could be causing maybe some feelings in you, or maybe feelings in them. When we're not paying attention and we're focusing away from the moment between you and others, you're not really present in that interaction. This can have a heavy price, right? It can have a lot of consequences. You might end up doing more of the following things, which is missing vital cues about the other person's needs and reactions. You might end up projecting inaccurately your fears and feelings on somebody else because you're not necessarily present in the moment and focused on something from the past or maybe even in the future. You may end up blowing up or potentially running away when you're feeling overwhelmed or caught off guard or surprised by a negative response that you could have seen coming had you been more present in the moment, again, instead of being in that mindless state where we're on autopilot and not necessarily being able to attune or attend to what's happening in the moment. Can anyone relate to experiencing some of these things in their relationships and in conflict with others in terms of, and how that maybe has affected I guess the interaction in a negative way? Okay. Yeah, Cindy, I think maybe all of us can relate to sometimes we jump to conclusions or make assumptions about things based on what we're feeling, and then again project that onto other people. Hmm. And that's not to say that what you're feeling or the assumptions that you're having aren't correct, but I think it's what's important is instead of just assuming that it's correct, to ask questions, right? If we're feeling something, if we're sensing something's off, we'll be curious about that. Well, what's going on? Is it something that I'm feeling and it's just me and my stuff, or is it something that's happening in the dynamic between me and that other person, or is it something that they're putting off, right? So it really does depend, like, where's that coming from? And asking questions and being curious about that can really help to, again, minimize any sort of overwhelming feelings, and it clarifies what's really going on rather than, again, we jump to conclusions and then that can lead to defensiveness or difficulty or more conflict in the long run. Hmm. Right. So maybe instead of saying it looks like you're feeling overwhelmed, be like, oh, like I'm sensing it seems like you might be overwhelmed. Like ask it more as a question rather than a statement, right? So then that leaves it open for them to correct you if in fact they are feeling something different, right? So by asking questions, we're able again to clarify and to help. It helps us understand better, right? When we're able to invite a conversation about these things, because then we're sometimes, especially in conflict, we don't understand what's going on, so that leads to trouble. Okay, so when we're able to have that mindful attention, this involves watching our own experience in relation to others. So like I was talking about, that dynamic between you and somebody else. So some questions that we can ask ourselves, is, do you need something from the other person? So for example, maybe with your partner, you're seeking more attention or more validation or more affection. Or maybe you're looking for more help from a family member or a friend or or your partner. So really asking yourself, are these feelings that I'm having because I need something from them and I feel like my needs aren't being met? You could also ask yourself the question, do you need to change the process between you two? So for example, making critical comments, making demands, asking really intrusive questions. So is the process of the way that you're communicating getting in the way of your maybe having a more harmony in your relationship? Another question is, do you have feelings that signal something important about what's going on? So are you feeling a sense of hurt or sadness, loss, shame, anxiety? So really tuning into what kind of feelings am I having, and maybe what is this trying to tell me? What kind of signals are my feelings telling me right now? By noticing your feelings, you can help really figure out what needs to change in a relationship. But again, before you're blowing up and running away. So when we're paying attention and we have that mindful attention, and again, like we talked about before, in terms of noticing our feelings and acknowledging those for what they are, again, we're able to figure out, okay, if this is how I'm feeling, say I'm feeling anxious, Why am I feeling anxious? Be curious about that. And what do I need in order to feel more secure or less anxious, right? And then when we're able to acknowledge those things and to figure out what it is that we need, we can ask the person that we're interacting with, again, whether it be a family member, a partner, or a friend, we can ask those people for what we need. Um, even in just general conversations, whether it be on the phone, whether it be in person, or even over text message, right? You can practice being an observer of the moment by attending to the other person's physical and verbal behavior. I'm sure some of us can agree that even with people that we're close to, we can often even notice just through a text message that they might be feeling off, right? So these are moments of attention where we're able to really pick up on the verbal and physical behaviors, and maybe not through text, obviously. But if you're in person or even on the phone or like on Skype or whatever, you can figure out how somebody's feeling based on their nonverbal cues, or even what they're saying or how they're saying it. So just paying attention to those things is going to be really important. If you're finding that anything is feeling ambiguous or hard to read, there's some clarifying questions, again, that we can ask, like we talked about earlier, right? In terms of, sometimes it's really helpful to ask clarifying questions. Some examples would be like, how are you feeling? Are you doing okay? Right? So that can open up a lot of conversation when you're asking those things. And when you do so in a way that invites conversation, right? So you're sending out that empathetic, caring, warmth response, right? You're asking that question with the intention to hear what they have to say. How are we doing? Are we okay? Asking those questions to your partner, even to a friend or a family member. This can be important in terms of clarifying, having conversations, I guess, to clarify where your relationship is, and maybe inviting, again, the conversation of where things might need to change. How are things between us? Right? So if you're noticing some shifts in behaviors or shifts in just connection or attunement, how are things between us? Again, and it's inviting a conversation about where both of us are at, right? You can also use the statement of, I notice blank, right? So fill in that blank with whatever you're noticing. Is that accurate? Is that what's really going on here? Right? So again, clarifying, maybe, again, that can go back to those assumption things that we say when we assume. This can be a good question to ask, again, to clarify if our assumptions are right. If we notice a certain type of behavior, or maybe they're saying something in particular, clarify that. Is this actually what's going on for you? And another question you could ask is everything okay with you, with us, right? So just being soft in the way that we're asking these questions, again, paying attention, to the moment, because, and I think the intention behind the questions, and maybe the tone that's used and the warmth that's involved with this question is important, because if you're asking it from a place of defensiveness, like, how are you feeling? Like, are you okay? Right? That can come off really harsh, and it might induce feelings of defensiveness in the other person. So the way that you're asking these questions are really important. So again, asking it with the intention to understand, the intention to hear, the intention to listen, and the intention to understand. It can be really helpful in, again, achieving the goal that you're looking for, which is to clarify and have an open conversation and dialogue about what's going on. But it's also, as much as it's important to maybe tune into what the other person is feeling, we also have to notice our own needs and feelings in the interaction as well. Do we have to ask the question, do we have to ask questions about this? Do we require communication on what's going on for us? And how could you say that? How could you express the way that you're feeling and your own needs that are happening in the moment in a way that preserves the relationship? So again, being really mindful and paying attention to what feelings are coming up. And instead of allowing those feelings, again, to become overwhelming and we snap, to be curious again and be like, okay, well, why am I feeling that way? Or how can I ask my partner or my friend or my loved one for what I need in that moment because I'm feeling X, Y, Z? And how do I do that in a way that's soft and not hard, I guess, or harsh? So overall, in summary, the first interpersonal skill that we need to cultivate here is that mindful attention, because it helps you read important signals about the state of a relationship. And again, it can lead us into asking questions that might help us clarify or develop more of an awareness of what's going on. Great. I think that's good, Cindy, in terms of calling yourself out in some way. And just, I think anytime you're able to, in a conflict or an argument or disagreement, to acknowledge maybe where you could have done better, or acknowledge maybe what you were doing wrong, and acknowledging your own responsibility in what's happening. I think that, again, that's an invitation for other people to, one, acknowledge maybe what they're doing, but it also makes them feel oftentimes heard or seen, right? Because you're able to acknowledge, okay, I know that I did that, and that probably led to you feeling like blank, right? So it can invite more conversation and further reflection on the part of the other person. Yeah. And again, it's helpful when we're able to explain why it is that we're feeling a certain way, or why it is that we do certain things or behaviors, right? It's important for our partners or friends to understand us in that way, to understand what makes us tick. Conflict can sometimes be an opportunity. As much as it feels uncomfortable, it can be an opportunity to really understand each other at a deeper level, right? Because when we're triggered by something, or when we experience overwhelming emotions, that means something. That's an important signal, right? So it's tapping into something that's important to us. So in order for us to invite that into the relationship, we have to be willing to acknowledge it in ourselves. And I think that's a great tip. Yeah, timing is absolutely right. You're bang on that. Sometimes it can feel in the moment really difficult to take a pause. It might feel, and especially if you have a partner or a friend who gets insecure about that, and who is somebody who needs to talk things out right away in the moment, sometimes that can lead to pushing, and maybe that push-pull kind of interaction. And sometimes it's not helpful to be emotionally charged and to be having those conversations. So being able to take a pause and to recognize, okay, I'm not able to talk about things in a productive, healthy way right now. I just need a minute. I just need to take a breath, and then we'll come back to it, is really helpful. Something to note for maybe everybody is, if you do need a pause, to make sure that you put a time limit on that. So don't just take a pause and leave it indefinite and leave it open to when you're going to come back to it, because that can lead to feelings of fear or anticipation on the end of the other person that maybe is waiting for you to come back to the conversation. So putting a time limit on it and just saying, you know what, maybe it's at night, maybe I'm just going to go to bed, we can talk about this in the morning, right? Or I'm going to take an hour, half an hour to just go relax, read a book, or go do whatever you need to do. And then we'll come back to it. So allowing yourself the space to take that time if you need it is important, and to recognize that you need that is great. But again, we also have to be mindful that the other person in the conversation may not be as able to acknowledge that they might need a break, and that this might be a good thing. So it might be helpful, again, to minimize the anxiety on their part, to give it a timeline, and to not let it kind of go just, I guess, because that can lead to maybe not talking about it again, right? So if we're going to put it on a pause, we have to ensure that we're going to come back to it, because if we sweep it under the rug, that can lead to further problems. Thank you, Cindy. All right. So improving our interpersonal skills, it can be really tough work. It's not an easy thing to do. I don't need to tell anyone how difficult it is to start to look at and to change our relationship patterns. These are things that are really deeply embedded into us. They have a lot of history. They have a lot of emotional weight to them. And they're really tough sometimes to one, pick out, and then two, to change, because we sometimes, again, when we get into that emotionally charged state and we're not able to rationally think through things, we just go to automatic responses. And oftentimes those can be problematic. But we know that changing our relationship patterns, or changing them for the better, and just maybe altering things and just being more aware of those, is really important. Some relationships you value might have blown up in the past because you didn't know how to fix things when something went wrong. So assertive communication is the ability to express your opinions in an open, honest, and direct way. It allows us to take responsibility for ourselves without judging or blaming others. Communicating assertively means expressing your ideas in a civilized way without being too aggressive or too passive. I think a lot of times when, especially, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, as women, we consider being assertive and asking for what we need to be something that's challenging sometimes. And assertive communication to us may sometimes feel like we're being aggressive, or that we're being, aggressive is the right word, I guess. But in reality, assertive communication is really just expressing what you need, right? It's being open about that, being honest about where we're at, how we're feeling, what we need, and being okay with that, and not feeling embarrassed or feeling uncomfortable with asking these questions or asking for what we need. As with most communications, sometimes being assertive works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes we may honestly forget to be assertive and forget to use this type of communication. But you'll also be amazed at how much assertive communication can really improve a conversation or help solve a problem. I think assertive communication, if we think back to I don't know if it was last week actually, but the week that we spoke about that wise mind, or our authentic self, rather than just using emotional self or the logical self. So when we're able to kind of use our authentic self, we're able to communicate assertively, and that can lead to good conversation, to productive conversation, to healthy conversation. And again, it also helps us solve problems in a way that we might not have been able to do before, had we only been using our logic or only been using our emotions. So in terms of communication styles, like we said, we have a couple different ones. I'm going to touch on passive communication, aggressive communication, and assertive communication. So when someone has a passive approach to communication, they tend to be too nice, or perceived maybe as weak or meek. They might be overly compliant. They give in when conflict arises. They avoid eye contact during conflict. They might speak softly. They tend to put themselves down. They may be emotionally dishonest about where they're at or how they're feeling, out of fear of how people might accept or reject their emotions. And they allow others, or tend to allow others, to walk all over them, and oftentimes might be bullied, right? When someone is assertive, they're firm but polite. They compromise with people. They come off as warm, friendly, and they use kind of direct eye contact. They speak in a conversational tone. They build up others and themselves. They're appropriately honest, and they stand up for themselves. On the contrary, when someone uses aggressive communication, they come across maybe as mean, harsh, or sarcastic. They might be viewed as people who are takers rather than givers. They use maybe a more too direct or glaring eye contact. They speak loudly and use threatening tones. They tend to put others down. They are inappropriately honest. And they tend to walk all over others and might be seen as the bully rather than someone who's being bullied. Can anyone identify maybe what communication style they have out of all of these? And maybe even it could be the passive aggressive one. I didn't touch on that, but. Passive. And I think sometimes too, depending on the situation, the context, we can likely be in different, have different communication depending on what the situation is. I feel as though sometimes, maybe during conflict, right, you could take on a more aggressive communication style because of the fact that you're feeling overwhelmed. And again, you feel like maybe you're feeling like your needs aren't being met or you're not being seen. So you feel like you have to take on what you want to take on a more assertive tone, but it ends up being maybe more aggressive than anything, right? Yeah. Great. So when we're able to practice this assertive communication style, it can really help being more effective in dealing with people. It might improve your ability to get your needs met. It will help you negotiate conflict without damaging that relationship. And it's going to strengthen your self-respect by giving you alternatives to maybe old damaging patterns of anger or withdrawal. So again, going between that maybe passive versus aggressive behavior, right? So when we're able to be more assertive, we're getting out of that old pattern of maybe passive or aggressive behaviors, and we're able to be more assertive. And again, this can help us get our needs met. It can help us deal with other people more effectively and also negotiate conflict. Okay, so we are going to do a little quiz. Well, not a quiz, but just a survey. So I want you to think back over interactions in your 5 most significant relationships, right? So just kind of get a feel of those, and you're going to check this different statements and keep track of which numbers you're putting check marks beside. So out of the 12 questions here, mark down maybe the numbers that you identify with. Okay. So I go along with something even if I don't like it. 2, I push people to do what's right even if there's an upset. 3, I try to be pleasant and easygoing no matter what people do or say. 4, I give people a piece of my mind when they deserve it. 5, I always try to be sensitive to what other people need and feel, even if my own needs get lost in the process. 6, I know what I want and insist on it, even if it means I have to get angry. 7, when there's a conflict, I tend to give in and let things go the other person's way. 8, when people don't do what is appropriate or reasonable, I don't let them get away with it. 9, I'll pull away from a relationship rather than say anything that could be upsetting. 10, you can't let people continue being selfish or stupid. You have to shake them until they see what they're doing. 11, I leave people alone and let them be whatever they are. And then 12, if people ignore my needs or insist on things that don't work for me, I get more and more upset until they pay attention. Okay, so if you tended to mark odd numbers, your predominant style is passive. If you checked the even numbers, you may have a tendency to have an aggressive problem-solving style. Did anyone notice one way or the other? They had odd numbers, so that passive style, versus the even numbers and that aggressive style. Odd numbers, it's still passive. And again, I think a lot of these statements, right, especially the odd ones, the more passive ones, we feel is being kind or being nice, or that's how we should act, or right, that's how we should be in the world. And not to say that it's not important to be kind, or it's not important to care about others, etc. But there's a way to do that in a way that doesn't give yourself away. So there's a way to acknowledge other people and to, I guess, not create any ripples. But again, there's a way to do that that doesn't involve completely giving yourself away. Yeah, it's funny that we think that that passive style means going with the flow. Because in reality, you're going with someone else's flow. You're not going with your own flow. Christine, if you have a question, sorry, just instead of raising your hand, you want to put it in the chat? That would be great. Thanks. Yeah, and I think, again, a lot of us might be able to relate to that maybe more passive aggressive commenting, right? Because it's scary to ask for what we want. It's scary for us to put it. I think when we become passive aggressive, it's because we are scared to say what we need. We're scared to cause that ripple effect. We're scared to make that conflict. But yet we feel really upset that we're not getting our needs met. So we get frustrated, and then that leads to that more passive aggressive thing, right? So I think, again, by acknowledging our needs, by acknowledging what we need in relationship with others, that can help us, again, be assertive about asking for those things. And it's going to feel uncomfortable the first couple times you practice this. It's not easy to start saying, you know what, this is what I need, especially if we tended to be more passive in the past. But again, just because it feels uncomfortable for you and it feels different doesn't mean it's not appropriate, or doesn't mean it's not valid. Your feelings are valid, and your needs are important, and they should be met by the people who are important in your life, right? And they won't know what your needs are unless you're expressing that to them. So having that assertiveness and expressing those things can be really helpful. Picking your battles, fair. Picking your battles is important. And I think that, again, that's kind of a skill that we all need to develop in relationships, in terms of knowing what's really important to talk about and maybe what's not, right? But again, if you're never picking battles, I think that can be where it becomes problematic, right? Because if we're always choosing on the side of, okay, well, I'm not going to say anything because it's not important, well, then you're constantly telling yourself, well, I'm not important, my needs are not important, and I don't have to ask for those things. So, and again, it's funny that we choose battle as the word, right? Because asking for what you need should not lead to a battle. And if it does, then that's an issue maybe that needs more attention, or more reflective thought. So the word battle is an interesting one to choose, because when we ask for what we need, that shouldn't turn into a battle. Just as when somebody else asks us for what they need, it doesn't turn into that. It's just, oh, you're just like, oh, okay, right. Yes, I can do that, right? So I would hope that that's a reciprocal relationship, or that's a reciprocal interaction where you give to people who you love, and they equally will give back, right? So it shouldn't be a battle in that way to ask for what you need, or to say how you're feeling. Okay. So every relationship consists of two people trying to get what they need, right? So there's you, and then there's another person, and you both have needs, and you're both trying to figure out a dynamic and a relationship and a flow that works well, so that that's reciprocated. Sometimes they need the same things, right? We all need companionship, recreation, being calm, maybe being quiet together, and it's easy. But when relationships require different things at the same time, or when one of them needs something the other doesn't want to give, that's when there's an issue there. So for relationships to succeed, we must be able to do the following. We have to know and say what we desire. We have to notice and find out what the other person desires. We have to negotiate and compromise so that you can at least get some of what you want. And again, give what you can of what the other person wants to, right? So it's all about, again, negotiating what your needs are, knowing what those are, and being able to effectively communicate that to somebody else. It's about knowing the other person's wants and needs, and again, trying your best to give those to them. And also there's compromise and negotiation on both parties to be able to understand, if I can't give you this, well, is that going to be okay? And how do we make that good? How do we make that still work? So if the I want, they want ratio isn't in balance, your relationship can become unstable. So paying attention to what each person desires, and in using that assertiveness and using those assertiveness skills to negotiate conflicts, is really vital to maintaining healthy relationships. So again, when two people want different things, I want, they want, and those things aren't coming together, connecting in some way, that can lead to conflict or issues. But it's about using assertiveness, about expressing what you need, and kind of coming to a conclusion or a compromise and negotiating what it is what does this look like, so that we both get our needs met as much as we can provide to the other person. without having to, again, sacrifice ourselves or give away too much in that regard. There's also the I want, I should ratio. So every relationship requires keeping a delicate balance between seeking what you want to do and doing what you think you should do for the good of the relationship or the other person. So if most of your focus is directed towards getting and doing what you want with little attention to what must be done or for the other person, you'll soon earn resentment, right? So and I guess this can also go in the opposite way too, is that we're constantly focused on doing and getting the other person's wants met, that can lead to resentment on our end. Just as much as if we're always focused on ourselves rather than focusing on what the other person needs, that can lead to resentment in them. So if you're overbalanced, we can fall into the shoulds. So how you should act, what you should do for the other person, the relationship will begin to feel a little bit joyless, maybe more like a burden, and you might start to think about ways of escaping or leaving that relationship, or just thinking that you might be better off in another relationship. So we're going to go through a little list here, the shoulds. The more items you check, the stronger your beliefs about the right and wrong way to relate with others, and the more likely you are to deny your needs in a relationship. So there's nothing wrong with having values about how to treat others, but if those values overpower your ability to ask for what you want, you'll end up feeling helpless in any relationship, regardless of who it's with. Okay? So again, keep track of maybe how many of these you relate to. You should try to give everything that's asked of you in a relationship, even when it means putting your own needs aside. When someone is in pain, you should do anything required to help them. You should be caring and considerate at all times. You shouldn't ask for something if you know the other person doesn't want to give it. There is a right way to act with people, and it should be followed, even if it means keeping quiet about your feelings and needs. You shouldn't express feelings that might upset someone. It's wrong. I don't have a visual for this one, Bethany. I don't think I do. I'm sorry about that. Actually, 1 sec. Maybe I can do this. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to put them in the chat. There. So they should be in the chat now. Sorry, it's a long list, but sorry, I should have thought of that when I was doing the slides, that's for sure. Okay. So where was I? Okay. Okay, you shouldn't express feelings that might upset someone. It's wrong. You should respond to the needs of others because their needs are a high priority. You should never hurt or offend anyone. You should try not to disappoint others. And the person's needs are valid. I'm not sure what that means. Okay, that last section there, I'm not sure. But yeah, does anyone relate to those shoulds or shouldn'ts, I guess, in terms of them, yeah, feeling these ways and these beliefs maybe getting in the way of, again, asking for what we need and asking for the way that we, yeah, what we want. Absolutely, yeah. Is there anyone in particular that stood out for anyone? Should not offend anyone, yeah. And again, right, these, all of these shoulds or shouldn'ts, they all draw on, again, ideas or themes of kindness or of being giving or caring and nurturing to other people, being considerate, and acting in appropriate ways, I guess. And again, it's not a problem, I guess, to have these things or to be this way. But again, if it compromises how you're feeling or what your needs are, if you're always and again, we have to take a balanced view here, right? If we're always giving to other people and never kind of allowing ourselves to be seen or heard or to have our needs met, then that's the problem, right? Sometimes, again, we have to give and take. Sometimes you will be giving a little bit more often, whatever situation might be coming up. Maybe your partner or loved one or friend can't give as much as they normally would, so you kind of have to pick up the slack. But if this is constantly the problem, if this is always the dynamic that you're in, that can, again, lead to a lot of resentment. And unfortunately, when we don't get our needs met, we don't feel good. So it's about, and we can't get our needs met unless we ask to have our needs met. Our partners, our family, our friends, they can't read our minds. They don't know what we need unless we are direct and we tell them in an honest, concise, clear way. Okay, let's see. Okay. So there are 6 core skills that can help change how your relationships feel. Knowing what you want. So this is really important, right? What we've been talking about this whole time is understanding what our wants and needs are. So by knowing what we want, it can really help us in, again, being assertive and asking for that. But how do we know what we want in a relationship? In some cases, you sense this sense of yearning, or maybe you're aware of discomfort. So again, the key is to pay attention and look for ways to describe in your own mind what you're feeling. So when we're able to do that, when we're able to know what we want and to know how we're feeling, it can help us clarify how to express that to other people. Another tip is asking for what you want. So again, once you know what you want, then you have to ask for that. And this has to be done in a way that protects the relationship. The basic idea is to put your needs into words that are clear, not attacking, and ask for specific behavioral changes. Another key thing is to negotiate conflicting wants. Like we talked about, if we're in that I want, they want, then it's hard to come to a mutual understanding. The willingness to negotiate starts with a clear commitment that there won't be winners or losers. It assumes that each person's needs are valid and understandable, and it draws on a willingness to compromise so that each person gets some of what he or she wants. So again, negotiating is really important too. And that doesn't mean, again, kind of what we talked about earlier in terms of picking our battles. That's not what negotiation is. Negotiation is getting some of your needs met as well, while also having the other person's needs met as too. So it's not about completely rolling over and allowing the other person to their needs to win out. It means really just, how do we come to a mutual understanding here of how we can both get some of what we need. Getting information is another key tip here. So one of the most crucial interpersonal skills is finding out what the person needs, what they fear, what they hope for, and etc. So major blocks to getting information are things like assuming falsely that you know what the other person wants. Maybe you project your own fears, needs, and feelings on the other person. Maybe you fear appearing like you're prying by asking too many questions. Potentially you fear hearing the worst possible answer, so you don't ask the question. And maybe it is that you don't know how to ask for what you want or what you're looking for. So some of it, if we feel any of those things, if we have any of those fears or we do some of those, then we may miss out on getting information that might be helpful for us in understanding our partners better, understanding ourselves better, and being able to attend to our relationship in a better way. Another key tip here is saying no. So in a way, again, we have to do this in a way that protects the relationship. You can say no in 3 different ways, right? We can say no in a timid, passive style that just gets overridden. You can say it with a hard edge, which it lends to an aggressive style, and this alienates people or gets that kind of defensiveness up. And you can also say it in an assertive style that validates the other person's needs and desires, but also sets firm boundaries around what you will and won't do. So the first 2 strategies, like being passive or being aggressive, undermine relationships because someone is going to end up feeling controlled and resentful. Whereas assertiveness leads to that communication and that compromise and negotiation. Another key part is acting according to our values. So being passive or aggressive in relationships diminishes both your self-respect and the self-respect of others, because someone is losing out in the relationship if there's a passive or aggressive communication style there. So someone's needs and feelings are always being ignored. Oftentimes it might actually be yours that are getting ignored. So being clear about how you want to treat others is a critical step in interpersonal effectiveness. So ask yourself, what type of relationships do I want with other people? Do you want loving relationships, a trustworthy one, or a committed relationship? Hopefully, as you've been using the skills and exercises in our workbooks the past couple of weeks, you've begun to think about how you value your relationships. And acting in your relationships according to what you value is another crucial step that will determine the entire nature of your relationships in general. So sometimes it might be the case where valueless relationships don't really work out well. So if your values aren't being acknowledged in a relationship, or maybe the values are conflicting, then maybe that's where the trouble lies, right? If 2 people, I'm talking, I guess, more in terms of intimate relationships, but if 2 people don't really value the same things and don't really want the same things from a relationship, that can lead to trouble and lead to having to step away. So some things that might be helpful is to try positive intentions, setting positive intentions and values for each of your relationships, and to act in those relationships according to what you are trying to achieve. Maybe in a relationship that you're struggling with, you're thinking, okay, I want to have a more maybe a more open relationship, right? And I guess maybe I'm using a friend in that example, right? So maybe you're noticing with a friend that they seem a little bit more closed off. There's not as many, you guys aren't connecting as well. You don't feel like you're in sync anymore. So how do you act in a way that allows that connection to flourish? How do you open up the relationship rather than having it be closed off, right? So again, just kind of thinking about your relationships and again, what it is you're trying to achieve from these things. Okay, so that is all I have for us today. Does anyone have any questions or comments or wonderings about today? Yeah, Monique, iMessages really do help. Yeah, definitely. This was a lot to think about today, absolutely. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed our lesson today. Your workbook kind of dives into assertiveness a little bit more, some boundary stuff, and some communication styles. So maybe take a peek at that if you have more questions about it. So if no one has any questions, just thank you everyone for being here today. Next week is our last week together, week 8. So I hope to see you all then. And otherwise, take care, have a good week, stay safe. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of their week.